So welcome back to the Dear Global Leader podcast. We are back with Manuel Opitz. So this is the part 2. So we'll discuss a bit how to lead when stakes, team, and complexity raise up at the global level. But last time we were with Manuel, and if you wasn't there, Manuel is a serial entrepreneur in health tech, Medtech, and also he raised multi-series fundings. He hired different people across different nationalities, and you also are a speaker on healthcare industry. So this is super interesting, and we'll jump into the part 2. But we forgot to do in the part 1 to talk a bit about your startup. So maybe the people can get to know you a bit if you can tell about the startup 1 and startup 2, and then we'll talk about the scaling up and going global.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany, for continuing our conversation. Really looking forward to the next 30, 40 minutes. And in my startup journey, which is now over, more than 10 years, actually. In the beginning, I was working as an employee in a startup with some experienced founders, as I mentioned during the last podcast. And that's something which I can highly recommend to everyone who wants to start out in, as a founder or maybe in the startup world. It really helps to have experienced people working with you for 1 or 2 years so that you can see what it is all about. And afterwards, I was able to, this startup actually was wound down. This is something which happens quite frequently in startups. Not every startup is going to grow forever. And the founders were actually quite deliberate and professional about it. So, there was no sudden bankruptcy or anything. They just saw that there was an impact on their business model. And as a startup, you usually don't have, 3 product lines. But there was a legal change in the US, which basically disrupted the business model. The price for the services that we were offering as an IP brokerage company were falling. And therefore, they were looking for a new business model. They tried 1 or 2 pivots and then decided that, they could stay as a small IP consultancy, but that's not really what they wanted to build. And therefore, they decided to slowly wind down the company, finish all the projects, and transition to new companies, endeavors, startups. And this taught me a lot about, also how to react in such a situation. And I went on to do then some consulting for another startup in the healthcare space, while at the same time writing the business plan together with, the founding doctor of then my next startup, whom I had also met through the network of those previous startups. So this is really something, once you're in the startup world and you get to meet the entrepreneurial people, there's usually, lots of ideas around and lots of things to do. So it's also okay to not have your own idea. It's totally fine to just immerse yourself in the ecosystem, go to startups events, meet other founders, ex-founders, people who work in startups, some of them already carrying idea, maybe just looking for the right co-founder opportunity to jump. This is really a great opportunity. And usually, all the people there are highly motivated, brimming with ideas, are very positive about what's possible. And therefore, in general, just a great experience. So I see a lot of corporate people as well, mingling among startup events to, I don't want to see,
myself included,
feel the innovativeness, Of course, they look at the ideas, say, well, this idea compared to the ideas we are working in our large company are much smaller, and the scale is maybe very, very minimal. But some of the ideas might actually, in the future, disrupt some of those corporates. And so that's, one of the great things to do in the very beginning, and which I did as well. I then went on to found a startup together with several experienced founders. We built the company for 6-7 years. And then I transitioned through parental leave and a pivot in the company when we cut off the hardware part to a new company. I already was working on several startup ideas, but in the end, there were again some doctors who had an idea because they were facing a constant problem. They had found kind of a solution, but it wasn't really productized. It wasn't really scalable. It was unregulated. They couldn't really use it on their patients. And that was exactly the right point to, team up with me and another experienced, technology leader from the startup sphere, and we help them to build a product out of it and build a company out of it. And this company now is Deepa Medical, which we are doing for the last 3-4 years, and it's in the ophthalmology space, providing the first ever therapy AI prediction. So we can basically foretell to doctors based on a single image on how a patient will react to treatment. This treatment is eye injections that they have received chronically over a couple of years until the rest for the rest of their life. And it's really hopefully going to change the way how we do such treatments, and the treatment in the end ultimately prevents those people from going blind.
Yes, this is revolutionary. And as you say, it's all about predictive steps. And this is what is the magic of the solution, is that we can see it before it happens and you lose sight. I had a question to start a bit, and I think it would be a tough one, but interesting one. It's always about the dilemma between scale and plateau, because you are in such a high growth industry, AI, but at the same time your environment is startup. You always hear, when we grow or we die. And then I know for sure that now you are in a plateau phase where you need to stabilize, and it's always about growth stabilization. Maybe you can tell us about how do you resist this, hype trap, and at the same time decide when to plateau and when to scale or grow.
It's also something which I learned over the last years, that in the past it was something which was pushed onto us. As you fully correctly say, ideally every year you hire 50% more people, you double your revenue, whatever. That's something which has kind of changed over the last 3-4 years as well, a bit in the startup ecosystem, that especially around the 2020s, growth was everything, and you were pouring money into companies. The companies were burning through the money, on marketing spend, trying to attract new customers, maybe not even retaining those customers, but trying to attract them. There were a lot of freemium solutions out there, not really fully monetized. And there came a huge, you call it SaaS shock now, later on, when those software as a service offerings were actually not fully sustainable. When you reduced your marketing spend, the new customers were dwindling, your customer retention was very low, and the willingness to pay was also very low. So I would say over the last 2-3 years, there has been, I would say, also due to the capital squeeze of having less investment, there was a trend towards looking a bit more at the financial sustainability of many of those endeavors early on. And in general, of course, it comes with the disadvantages of less ideas being funded, less potentially disrupting ideas, and also less scaling of those ideas. But on the other side, it also brings some kind of economic feasibility to the ecosystem. And that's something where, based on my experience also from the previous startups, I'm now very conscious to make sure that before, or let's say when you're building the company, you start out with a small team of a couple of founders, and you don't really need any money. I mean, hopefully you have some kind of, income, and you can sustain yourself, but you don't need big salaries, and you can tinker a bit on the idea until the timing is right to hire the first people, because you have the first revenues very early on. And before that, I wouldn't scale if you don't have such revenue. And then you can maybe bring on an investment. Many, they try to bring it on as early as possible, but as soon as you have those investments, you have the pressure to grow very, very fast. And that's something which now we rejected, and we were actually bootstrapping with our own money and a lot of customer revenue, some public grants in the beginning. And we were profitable actually in our first year with a couple of 100,000 of sales. And we put all the money, however, in external developers, which we could also basically stop at any point of time if we were to run out of money. And as a next step, then we were doing a funding round, and already before the funding round, we basically had started to hire and select the team that we would need after the funding round. And shortly after the funding round, we were kind of done with hiring. We went from 3, 4 people to 8, 9 people, and we were kind of stable for a very long time at this stage. Again, that's something you have maybe, in Europe, 2 years, in the US, 18 months between funding rounds. So if you only start to hire when you have done your funding round, it's kind of too late, because you will never build the traction and make the progress that you need to then raise the next funding round, because you can't really reach some milestones without this team. And that's something, again, that then helps us to be on such a plateau. And we are right now, as you said, we are, or we were on such a plateau that we have rising revenue. We are not that far away from break even. It's a very comfortable position. And it's also very helpful in our investor discussions, who usually ask you, what's your runway? Basically meaning, when do you need money? Because otherwise you will be bankrupt, which for them is huge leverage. And telling them, well, I'm actually quite close to profitability, and maybe we could even, lay off 2 freelancers or stop our project in the US, and then we are break even. That's something which for them, is kind of annoying, because they know they don't have the leverage over you to say, okay, I'll just, you tell me you have 2 months. Yeah, you have 2 months of runway. I'll come back in 2.5 months, and then I know I can basically dictate to you the time of the investments. And that's something which, in the former hyperscaling world of startups wasn't possible. But something as a repeat founder which I'm trying to emphasize, while of course being super conscious that right now, for instance, we see there is an opportunity, there is huge investor interest in us. We could try first to go for full break even, but I think there's a unique opportunity for us now to raise funds, to also build out our evidence mode, to build out our product advantage that we have, because our competition, they have received funding recently, and over long and short, they will also, see that they maybe can try to enter in our unique area of the market, and try to, really compete with us one-on-one there. And that's something which we don't want to have. So we definitely want to keep our speed and product advantage.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I was thinking, when you were talking a bit about pivot and scaling, and we're talking a lot of pivots in part 1, if this is interesting for the listener that haven't didn't listen to the part 1, I wondered, what are the signal for you to change some processes in your organization? Because if you have to scale, or if you have to add new people, you cannot operate the same way that you did a few months ago. So do you have some signal that tells you, okay, we have to change something?
I think in an organization, it's always, you see how much time do you still have to work on certain tasks. And if you see you can't really allocate the time necessary for those tasks, and ideally you have to make sure that this is going into a robust process, because it looks like you're doing the process over, or the steps over and over again, the task. And then it's something which you can describe in a process. You can write it down, you can make a flow chart, whatever. You can put it in a job description and basically delegate it. So that's kind of one of the points in a startup, that you always have the feeling in the beginning, it's ideally best if the founders are doing everything, and that they try in the very beginning, when it's unclear on how to best solve it, until they have find a proper solution which is 90% working, and then they can put it into a process and try to hand it over, or nowadays automate it with AI agents. But just make sure this is not something blocking you anymore. That's, for me, I would say, one of the signals. And one of the other signals, as I just said, is, before funding round, you should make sure that you have the right people already in mind that you want to hire, that you also raise the right amount of funding to pay those people or do those studies and everything. And last but not least, there's also a scale of the organization. I mean, as I described briefly before, in the beginning, you are maybe 2, 3 founders, everything is very flexible. Then you hire, a couple of first founding engineers, maybe some working students that work with you, but it's all still flat hierarchies. Everyone is doing everything. Then you have a small team. That's something which we're also very conscious about right now. We try to stay below the level of, let's say, usually 15 people, I would say. That's when it gets more complicated and you need not just an org chart, but really like super clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and team leaderships. Below 15 people, you don't really need to have, big team leads and managers, you can say, or leaders, but it's basically everyone is a leader. And then there's, of course, another breaking point around 35-ish, maybe 50 people, depending kind of on the organization, what you're doing, where you need another hierarchy level and things become much more scale up and corporate governance than before. For us, I mean, we're operating in, as you said, in the Medtech space. It is very crucial to actually have all those, role descriptions, org charts, and processes defined very early on, because it's one of the prerequisites to sell a medical device, which actually costs you quite some time in the beginning and can slow down the company. But on the other side, the advantage is that we have a quality management system and very clearly defined SOPs, standard operating procedures early on, that in the best case are written in a way that you can refine them and scale them later on, which also enables you then later on to possibly grow faster because you already have everything written down and structured and documented. And the last aspect, which I always like to stress, is, you build your internal culture, the learning culture and proper documentation culture, which nowadays is super powerful more and more, not just for finding all the information cross team, but also using it to ingest it into your internal AI, which then serves as a multiplicator of the knowledge and databases, which usually otherwise is only restricted to the founders who really have the overview of all the documentation and knowledge and process in your company.
Yeah, super interesting again. And I wanted to talk about people because you mentioned them a lot. This is something that I love to talk about. So I wondered if you could mention a bit like hiring is such a hard skills. When you're a founder, it's very maybe hard also to get all these new skills. You need to be a leader. We already discussed about it. And now you need also to hiring. So be a bit HR. And there is also this diversity around it. So what was your approach? And why did you decide to go for diversity? And how did you make this diversity become an advantage?
I'd like to be quite honest, the term HR, it's for me like more people operations in the end, but that's just a personal thing. This term for me is a bit outdated. What I think is, for working on the recruiting and people development side, that's something which I was super interested in very, very early on, because my goal always as a CEO and co-founder is to make myself redundant or replace myself bit by bit by bit. So ideally, I have a role description, and over time, I will hand over parts of those roles. And that's something which I've instilled in the 2 companies that I co-founded, that there's a written profile for everyone. And once we grow and we see things are taking up more time, I can actually extract some of this role description and make a new role, a new job description out of it. I don't have to think about what I need for this role, because I'm doing those tasks actually already several times per week or multiple times per month. And I can actually now take it out as a slice of myself and put it on there. And this also helps, of course, enormous for the onboarding process. Regarding the then following, interview process when you're looking for people, that's something which I think, regardless if it's startups or if it's corporates, there are happening quite a lot of errors. I've seen really bad interviews myself as an interviewee, but also being maybe part of the interview jury. And I think there's so many errors that happen there. I know an experienced recruiter who still says, my gut feeling is the best method to recruit. And I think this is not really the right way forward and leads to some kind of biases and blind spots in your hiring process. So having a really structured interview process to minimize the personal impact you as a recruiter have is crucial. Having multiple interviewers that ideally don't see the notes from each others, but there's a scoring system defining what is good and bad on certain predefined scales, doing this scaling exercise, and then in the end only exchanging notes once everyone has done the scoring, discussing then maybe the biggest difference between those scores. This is already going a very long way. And ideally, we as a startup often don't have the possibility to really, invite people for test work, but I think it's a really cool way. So slightly faster ways maybe to have coding challengers or IQ tests. Both are pretty predictive depending on the role that you have about the future job success. And the last aspect is, of course, if you then hire somebody, ideally you have checked for cultural fit, for team fit, everything, inviting team members also for some sessions before. But there can also still be a misfit, and having a very open and fast feedback cycle. Like in our companies, we usually have 3 feedbacks within the probation period of typically 6 months, and being very honest about the expectations that we have and that are fulfilled or maybe not yet fulfilled, and also getting the feedback the same from the other side about, okay, I expected you as a startup to be at this stage. I see you're lacking some processes here, but it's something that I can deal with. I can actually help you to fix this, but that's something which for me is not okay. This in the end helps you to also then at the very end make the decision, which I learned again from somebody, would you rehire this person after 3 months or 4 months or 6 months in the probation period? If you would now to start all over again, would you rehire the person knowing what you know right now? And if it's a clear yes, everyone is happy, you can throw a party, you have found somebody who will really not just, help the team, but maybe bring the team to the next level. If the answer is, yeah, maybe I would have read 1 or 2 more CVs, you should really try to separate, because in the end, otherwise you will, after 9 months, 1 year, you will find out for both sides that you're not super happy with each other. And in a small team, this is super, super crucial, even more than in larger teams. But again, that's also the biggest advantage you have over a startup and a corporate. In a corporate, you come in, you have a set team, and you have to deal with the people who are there. In a startup, you are hiring your own team, and you can make sure that you work with people who are not maybe too similar to you, but maybe sometimes also complementary to you, and can help where you have some weak spots, and also you can help them with things to improve that you are very good with.
Totally. And I wanted to know also this diversity piece, because 30 different nationalities is what was the mindset behind that?
I think it's an excellent question, and it's not really the goal to be diverse. It's something that we are kind of proud of by now, but which just happened thanks to this process, which I just described.
Yeah.
There's maybe in the beginning that I had to put in a rule to say, okay, till the last interview round on the software developer side, you have to have a female candidate. Maybe, you put in some restrictions in the beginning when you see it's not really working. But in general, this process helps you actually to find the best people with the possible, not based on their CV or how they present themselves in an initial interview, but really on the skill set and on their aspirations to work in your company. And more often than not, these actually tend to be people who might be overlooked in other processes where people are looking more for similarities and they're really looking for the skills. And this means just quite very concretely, in our case, as a startup with also kind of, limited funding, limited brand, that these are often internationals moving to Munich, which is a highly attractive city. This can be often internationals where we can also offer, some help in getting them here, getting them through the bureaucracy. This can be often, female engineers or female leaders who are maybe, less recognized or would receive lower ranking offers in another company. And so it is more the result of the process than from the get-go our goal to have such a diverse team. The disadvantages come with this is, of course, you have lots of cultures and you have to adapt to each other, and there needs to be an openness for such culture, and something which we also tell now every potential new employee, that we are pretty diverse, that we speak many languages, have many cultural backgrounds, and if you feel uncomfortable in such a situation, this is probably not the best company for you to work with. But on the other side, it's also giving us, I am pretty convinced, higher long-term success, although maybe it requires a bit more effort in the beginning for the team building and adjustment. In the long run, you are just much more, how to say, the company is much more stable against external shocks. There's always somebody who has seen something like this before. There's always somebody who has lived maybe in a country before. You're thinking about a new market. There is somebody in our company who speaks the language, who lived there, who knows people there just to call up. There might be political situations changing. We are really very resilient to such external shocks with such a diverse team, I would say. And maybe one other component which is often overlooked, we're also a very diverse team on the age scale. So we have people in the 20s and we have people in the 50s. We're not the typical,
the
university
generational
spin out. And there's generational clashes. You have this, but in the end, this also helps us to better understand our customers, who are also often more in the 50s or 60s or 70s. And therefore, it's quite helpful to have a couple on the team who are in this age group or very close to the age group, compared to only having university graduates who are all digital natives.
And I love, we should make this as a quote and put it on the wall, this thing of diversity was the result of a process, and this was not, engineered, because then it comes back this bad mindset that people think that some people got their seats because of a quota. And then it also creates a lot of consequences for this person and the relationship. And so I think this should be something I would cut somewhere. But yeah, I really love what you say about diversity, and especially also the last point about the diversity of point of view, not only the background, but in every day we always relate about our personal experience and what we know about, usually our own country and market that we are lived in. And suddenly when you have this collection of people, you have access to so many network, and, people are connected by these, circles. And now you are intersecting so many diverse circles that you can have different views on the same questions. And I think this is really like the magic of diversity. So thanks for mentioning that. I see the time running, so I will ask you one last question before the last quick question of the podcast. And this is, what is a CEO founder day like? Not the LinkedIn version, but what is it really to be CEO and founder of a startup?
So usually I describe myself in two ways. One is that I say I'm a translator. As a startup CEO, I have lots of experts in my company, especially my current company. On average, the people have 17 or 18 years of working experience. I'm actually below this. And therefore, my role is to translate between, let's say, maybe the clinical expert and the developer, or between the medical doctor and the salesperson, and then get out of the way. And really having this translation is super crucial, and also framing it that it always fits with our vision is very crucial. Another way that I say you're also always a janitor. If you don't order the toilet paper, you don't have toilet paper. So, if you don't do it, and it's the same, from office supplies, besides, there is a lot of crucial tasks, and you have to think really about everything. And if you drop the ball, then it won't get done. That's really something which is not maybe the LinkedIn sexy version, but it's just the case of what's happening there early on. And more long-term or strategic, what I also try to transport is, making sure that we have some kind of, what Daniel Kahneman called some decision-making hygiene. So decision-making
Yeah.
is kind of the key skill that for me as a CEO, I'm using every day, making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that most of those decisions are better made closer to where the experts or the problem is.
Mm.
So I see it rather that my role is to actually help those people doing a process that enables them to do the best decision themselves. So to
Mm-hmm.
having a proper, cost benefit analysis, you could say, write down all the pros and cons. This is super helpful, but also find out what kind of decision is it actually that I'm doing. Is it an easy reversible
Mm-hmm.
decision? Well, just try something, fail often, fail fast, as long as it's reversible. This is
Yeah.
often misquoted because, if there is a decision, especially in healthcare, where it involves patients, you should, of course, not do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. There is
But
context
this is not
matters
a
here.
reversible decision. And for those decisions,
Mm.
then it's really important to really have a proper process. And in our case, we have, for instance, a Google spreadsheet, which provides a template for cost benefit analysis, which we use for everything. We use it for recruiting and scoring candidates to make a clean decision process there. We use it for deciding between different notified bodies. We use it for identifying a new recruiting software. We use it for prioritizing possibly different features for the product. Everything
Mm-hmm.
follows a very similar process. Some of them are more automated, some are less automated. But in the end, there is a process which tries to minimize subjectivity and also puts upfront our, let's say, European way of looking, or especially, the
Mm-hmm.
French-German way of looking at things, that we don't get over enthusiastic. We really try to
Mm.
also always play the advocatus diaboli, look at it,
Mm.
look at the possible downsides, the risks, and then when we have really fine-tuned, we can take this decision and then run with it. And yeah, in a startup, this of course doesn't take, a couple of months to make because you don't have as many stakeholders. But
Mm-hmm.
for some really large decisions, like, IP involving IP rights, launching into new markets, we still also have, our governance and our board to consult, which only meets every, 2 months. If need be, we can of course call it up and have a talk call in a couple of days. But still, there's some kind of process also involved, which makes
Mm-hmm.
sure that some of the more crucial decisions are
Mm.
checked in such a process. And I would say that's my, everyday life during the day, being there, attending a lot of meetings, facilitating those meetings and decision-making processes, not trying to put always my opinion first, but just helping them to
Mm-hmm.
see that the best argument wins, or the overall decision is something that seems to take into account most of the risk and consequences. In between, supporting a lot of personnel issues. This can be anything, from
Mm.
illnesses to personal problems, maybe not related to the work life.
Mm.
And then sometimes during the evening hours, like right now, I also like to take a look at what happened during the day and send a couple of emails, because during the day, usually I try to focus on the colleague I'm working with and
Mm.
less on the emails.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So even evening time is full with work for you. But look, we arrive at the end of the full episode, part one and part two, and I always have this like three short answers. I mean questions answers. So I will ask them. So the first one is like, what is something that you learned early on and that you still use today? It can be art or soft skills.
So in German, we have a proverb, wer schreibt, der bleibt. This basically means if you write it down, it stays. I write down everything. It helps me to structure my finding. I actually do it typing on a keyboard. Many others like to do it
Mm.
handwriting, whatever. It
Yeah.
really helps for information to stick into your brain, but it also helps me to structure what I listen to and bring it into a form, and then also show it again to the people in the meeting. So we usually do it in
Mm-hmm.
a Google document. Everyone is watching.
Yeah.
Everyone can also correct it and change it, so that there is clarification right on the spot. And I think this is super helpful for learning and has helped me in my career. And I know many of former colleagues who now apply similar methods in their companies wherever they are.
I love it. I'm also very, I have like a pen and paper, so I can see what you mean. The second question is, a lot of the people that are our listener are emerging leaders. They are either working globally or not, or internationally, or aspire, and they would like to lead at some point. Or we will have like leaders that wants to lead maybe more globally, regionally. So I was wondering, do you have an advice for these people? It can be the same. It can be one reflection for leaders and one, advice for younger leader.
So of course, my answer is to be join a startup. No fun. Just joke aside, but expose yourself to the situation where you can lead, and this can be the private side. This can be some, voluntary organizations, actions that you do. This can be also in a company, just taking first, an intern or two under your wing. If you do this well, people will see and recognize it. Exposing yourself to this early on and gain the experience, not just in theory by doing whatever an MBA or professional training, but really doing it hands-on is the best way you can do, and find out for yourself if this is something you want to do later on, or maybe you're more looking for an expert career, which is also, totally an option.
Super. Last question. I need to always say it's mostly a me question, but I take the opportunity if it can help also listener. But I am an avid reader. I love nonfiction, but I'm also open to read the fiction books. And I always ask my guests if they have like a book recommendation. And it doesn't have to be here about startup or about the topic we discussed, but just one book you may like to give to some people.
The one that helped me probably the most is Thinking Fast and Slow by whom I already mentioned, Daniel Kahneman. And it really helps you to learn about behavioral economics and understand that we as humans don't think and act like machines, but that we are influenced by many factors. And there's a follow-up book by now, Noise, which is not very easy to read, but still extremely helpful to understand, again, like the factors that influenced our decision making. So if you're involved in decision making process, and especially as leaders leading such decision making process or taking decisions, looking into those two books will really shape you and hopefully, lead you to making or having the process for making better decisions in the long run.
Super. But thanks so much, Manuel. If some people wants to follow you or your work, should they then follow you on LinkedIn and maybe also the biomedical LinkedIn page, or where should we redirect them?
100%. So we have irregular updates on our LinkedIn page for Deep Biomedical. If you want to apply, we have a career page on our website. And if there's no position, we also take unsolicited applications. It always helps if you also, of course, network. Be free to contact me, connect with me. And if you want to apply, it also helps to write a quick message to me or some of the other colleagues in the team. Of course, it depends on the position you're looking for. And I'm very happy to be in contact with many more people from your audience, which I hope will be a global audience, so that I can also get people to know
31
that are
nationalities
outside of my bubble.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And as always, I will also ask the listeners if they can put some comment or rating for the podcast. Then it helps me continue having fantastic guests. So thank you so much, Manuel. And hopefully maybe a part 2 at some point. I mean, part 3, yeah, actually. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Tiffany.